Hey, welcome to Mikey's Video Game Madness. Today we are playing Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night on the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is also available on the PC, the Switch, and the Xbox One. The Xbox One, I think, is true 4K, where this is upscaled, and it also is the only version that has HDR, but based on articles that I've read, the HDR is kind of artificially brightened and kind of forced into it. I don't know if that's like a Xbox One X requirement, but apparently the colors are desaturated. So based on everything I read, as HDR currently is on the Xbox One platform, apparently it's not really that big of a deal, but maybe 4K on the PC and Xbox One looks great because the art style is really nice in this, and I'm glad they actually delayed the game and took some time to update it. As this game goes further on, there'll be periodic updates that are free. They're not like patches to like fix the game, although I've heard people having crashes. I have not personally experienced one myself, but apparently it is a thing, and people that I've trust have said it's happened to them. So I'm sure there'll be bug fixes later on, but there'll actually be free DLC patches, which actually adds extra characters, especially the ones from Ritual of the Night, Curse of the Moon, which I will eventually cover. That is like the 8-bit prequel to this game, although now I'm hearing it's a spin-off because the story took a turn. I don't know. At this point, I have not finished either game and still working on it, so we will see on that. But it is cool to go back and play Curse of the Moon and actually see like the 8-bit versions of these characters are. If you play Circle of the Moon first, you actually get to see what the characters were actually supposed to be. So this is basically a spiritual successor of the Metroidvania games. Now, I say that it's a spiritual successor of Symphony of the Night, but the more I play it, it also takes some cues from the later games that were on the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS, especially Aria of Sorrow. Hopefully I'm saying that right. All the Castlevanias on the DS are pretty much after Symphony of the Night. Most of them have like weird like names that just roll off of the tongue, like Harmony and Dissonance. Trying to think the Order of Aglacia and stuff like that, and I could be butchering it. I'm just gonna say the creators of Symphony of the Night and stuff like that, because I would butcher their names as well. This is fully in 3D polygons, where the other games were 2D sprite based, but some of the enemies and some of the games were actually made out of polygons, so it was kind of a mixture. In some games like Symphony of the Night definitely had some polygonal stuff going on, but the 2.5D perspective, it isn't used often to like switch the camera around, but it does happen eventually. One gripe I have with the PlayStation 4 Pro version is their version of upscaling, because when I switched this to 1080p in some aspects, I thought it looked better, because some of the whatever method they used to upscale to 4K didn't exactly turn out that great, because it looks really pixelated. It kind of reminds me of when Assassin's Creed Syndicate originally got PlayStation 4 Pro support, and it looked worse than like the regular game, and eventually they patched it and looked fine. It's not nearly as bad as that, but I almost feel like the 1080p version looks a little bit sharper and blends in well. I almost feel like if they couldn't have gotten the upscaling right, maybe it would have been better if they would have stuck to leaving it at 1080p, and at least then you were guaranteed a steady frame rate or whatever. But maybe they'll fix it in the future. I don't know. This started as a Kickstarter program about 4 or 5 years ago, and then I didn't hear anything about it for a long time. I thought this game was canceled. But I guess it was like the fastest Kickstarted game and then Shenmue 3 came along, and I think it beat that record, but it was really nice to see the creator of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and as well as the other Game Boy Advance and DS games, which were fantastic. I don't know if it's nostalgia or whatever, but Symphony of the Night is my favorite one. But this does take some things from Order of Ecclesia and Aria Sorrow, where you actually get some of the enemies' powers and use them as power-ups. You don't really have like the standard weapon, like standard 3 or 4 weapons that you would in a regular Castlevania game. So it's closer in those games in that respect, where Aria Sorrows, where you get it from the enemies, and then I think it was Order of Ecclesia, where you actually had like these super spells. And there was also Portrait of Ruin, where you played as the 2 different characters, and the female character I think used books, and I believe you could combine them. Those were all really cool games. I'm hoping they come out with another Castlevania collection. They recently updated it with the Japanese versions, which I think is awesome, because so far I'm not a huge Contra person. Like, I appreciate the artwork and the tight gameplay and all that stuff, but it was really slim pickings. But I'm surprised, like, the Castlevania version, although some of the stuff they pick for that particular title is questionable, like the Game Boy version of the Castlevania Adventure, because there is a Wii remake which actually is quite good. I hopefully they'll release another one, but they actually added more games to the Castlevania Anniversary Collection for free. So we got all the Japanese, well, most of the games have like the Japanese version. I don't think they put like the Japanese version of like Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest on it. I wish they would add some fan translations, to be honest with you. That would be really cool, because that would actually fix some of the aspects of Castlevania 2 where you actually don't need a guide. I mean, I don't know how you would beat that with a guide. I'm sure somebody did it, but there's just like some really cryptic things that it's almost like impossible to know unless you were trying to like purposely break the game. So the gameplay on this is really tight. You play as this character. My brain just went blank. I believe it's Marion. I believe that is. She's actually in the prequel as well. Pretty much most of the protagonists in the game are actually you play as in the prequel. We'll just call it the prequel, Circle of the Moon. That's basically based off of its spiritual successor almost to Castlevania 3, and it's really cool. And she was one of the characters. She's actually the second character you unlocked, and that game's really cool. When you look at these enemies, you actually can tell what they were kind of like based off of. These were definitely based off of the little dragon skull stacks that you would fight in Castlevania. Here we go. I actually unlocked like one of the powers of what that enemy can do. I already unlocked that particular power, so it kind of just like adds up, and then you actually go to like a alchemist, and you actually can combine those powers to make stronger attacks with the attacks that you already have. And then there's actually spell attacks, familiars, which if you played Symphony of the Night, that's the thing that's like when you have like a little thing that follows you and helps you, and they actually level up and stuff as well. I'm trying to show very little of this game because part of the appeal to this game is to find or discover secrets in new areas of the castle and discovering all the unique enemy types and stuff like that. So I kind of want to keep that to the minimum. Was this game worth the wait? Well, if you like any of the newer Castlevania games before the Lord of Shadow games came out, definitely this feels like this would have been the next game released on a 3DS and Switch if they didn't switch to the Lords of Shadow series, which I always felt, which I think are good games, but they never felt like Castlevania games to me. They felt like more of a gothic themed God of War, but like even the gothic theme part, the enemies felt like they were more from Lord of the Rings than Castlevania. I finished Castlevania Lords of Shadow. I played a good majority of the 2D one, which I can't remember what it was called, the one that came on the 3DS, and then I played very little of Lords of Shadow 2, which I think actually completes the story. I'm hoping that Konami takes note of the sales of this game and the popularity of the Netflix series. I'm guessing it's fairly popular because they got their own Funko Pops way after the series came out, so I feel like the series must have done pretty good to get Funko Pops way after the series without like, I could understand if like they already had them planned before the new season, but it was renewed for a third season, and the way Netflix is canceling things left and right, it must have done pretty fairly well. And even though it takes some liberties, it actually followed the Castlevania 3 storyline fairly close and seems to be going into the Curse of Darkness storyline, which was the second 3D game on the PlayStation 2, and it actually came out on the original Xbox as well. And that was actually a direct sequel to Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse on the NES, which is what the Netflix series is based on, and it kind of like led towards that. So I think that's what it's going towards, but I do hope eventually, if the series holds on, it'll skip and go to other generations of Belmonts and Castlevania. But I'm hoping Konami takes note of the success and how awesome this game is, and Curse of the Moon, and hopefully the Anniversary Collection's doing well. I'm guessing they wouldn't support it all that much if it wasn't, and probably wouldn't get the Japanese versions of the game, although they did promise it fairly early. But even though it's Konami, on the back of my mind really holds faith that they hired talented people and they changed their ways, and they give us new Castlevanias and Metal Gears. And I know they're doing Contra, but the new Contra that's coming out, I think it's called like Rogue Corps or something. It's like an overhead version of Contra, which in my opinion were like the weakest aspects of Contra 3, the Alien Wars, which had an overhead perspective. It kind of has like a Robotron twin stick shooter, Smash TV, Total Carnage, like twin stick shooter style. When I think Contra, I always think of side-scrolling 2D with really good controls, but I'm not a hardcore Contra fan. I know they tried it again on like the second game released on the PlayStation 2, but there was a Contra game that like not a lot of people talk about that I thought was really awesome. Like, it's the only Contra game that like I ever bought like that wasn't like old. Like, I bought like Super C for the NES on the 3DS just to have it. I haven't bought the Anniversary Collection of Contra, but the one that came out, the first one on PlayStation 2, I can't remember what it was called offhand, but it was really cool. It was actually made by the people, I believe, that made Contra 3 on the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom, depending on where you're from. And that game was really fun, and I actually got farther than I've ever personally have in a Contra game because it was just so good. It was 2.5D, and it was all in 3D, which, you know, for a long time, like, people didn't think you could do some of these games in 3D with the current technology because, I don't know, maybe the frame rate and everything wasn't there. I don't know. But hopefully Konami, at the very least, they'll come out with sequels to the Anniversary Collections. But I hope they also add to their library and stick to the normal canon. So this is the only boss that I'll really show. But as you can see, the boss designs are really cool. I'm kind of sucking at this game a little bit because I was like recording multiple games while doing this because I don't always have a consistent schedule, so I wanted to make sure that I did as much as possible. Also, I know that people are gonna be watching this, so that kind of adds some stress. But the controls are really fluid, the graphics are really nice, and I really like it. One thing that I feel like isn't getting a lot of love, and some of the people that I've seen have covered this in YouTube and articles that I've read, is just the score. The score of this game is freaking fantastic. It's also made by the person who worked on a lot of the Castlevania games, starting with Castlevania Bloodlines all the way up to, I believe they worked on like the Nintendo DS ones, but I'm not sure. I know the art style changed, and then they got the same person to do the art style, at least for the cover of the game. And the character art and design seem like they're done by the same artist, and I'm glad they went back to the classic style that was in the first few games. I think it stopped with Aria's Sorrow, and then it came out with this more plain anime look and lost like its gothic matte painting look mixed with manga, which I absolutely adore, and I'm glad that they stuck with that. I absolutely love the cover artwork to this game. It would make for an amazing poster, and I just hope this game really does well. I don't know how they calculate sales with like Kickstarter games, but haven't seen a lot of people complain. Some people complain that it's not natural, like where you have to go, because you have to backpedal in these games once you get a power and find out where you previously couldn't go before. So some people find that like kind of frustrating and a relic of old times, but I don't know, I kind of like the discovery of the castle. And if you're used to playing of any of the more contemporary 2D Castlevania games, you'll have no problem. I mean, you literally have like a map showing you where you haven't been. Like, rule of thumb is if there's an area that hasn't like been filled out all the way, you go to that area. It's quite simple, but I don't know, some people seem to be struggling with it. You do have to, unless you're really, really good, I'm not the best game player in the world. I play better than I do in this video, but I'm still not the best. Like, so I find that I had to grind a little bit more than say I would in Symphony of the Night. But again, I was like, she controls a little bit different. There's not many of these types of games that come out, so I'm also a bit rusty. And I noticed that when I went back and replayed Castlevania Symphony of the Night, like I wasn't good as I used to. But like a good like hour or so of playing it, and the more that I play it, the more like I get used to the characters' controls and stuff like that. And the weapons, all of them feel really different and good depending on what kind of enemies you fight. But it does change like the attack speed, what you're gonna do. That's the alchemist that kind of like helps you out, where you can enhance your shards and stuff like that, which I'm kind of showing you. Again, I don't want to show you too much, which is why I'm skipping the cutscenes and stuff like that. So was it worth the 5 years? Most definitely. Like, I can't imagine like any other game coming out that's actually like this and actually feels so close to Castlevania, because in all intents and purposes this is closer than the last few Castlevanias that Konami have released, even though it's not Castlevania. But yeah, it definitely is. There's some cool surprises if you followed the series that I don't want to spoil, but they're there, like especially if you played a lot of Symphony of the Night. Like, you'll be happy with some of the surprises, some of the voice acting, etc., etc. One thing Castlevania is notorious for is Castlevania Symphony of the Night is notorious for, to the point where they re-recorded it for some of the re-releases, is the voice acting. This voice acting isn't too terrible, and neither is the writing. They did a much better job, especially the main character. She seems believable. I always felt like Alucard and the Symphony of the Night. I actually liked the original Alucard more than the re-release, so I always thought that person did a good job. Maria was decent. Dracula and Richter were kind of weird. For whatever reason, I did like the way Death sounded. I'm all over the place with this. I have a lot on my mind. I was debating on doing this video, but I was like, I gotta release something. But you don't see it as much, but because I downscaled it to 1080p. But when you play in the PlayStation 4's 4K mode, like when it shows the portraits like this, when the characters are more close up, they definitely look really pixelated, like there's artifacting around the lines, like when you have a straight line, it looks like there's extra pixels being added. I don't know how to explain it, like it just looks kind of sloppy, but like once it zooms out, everything looks fine. But I mean, worst comes to worst, if that really bothers you, which it doesn't with me, like I got over it within like 20 minutes, but I'm just pointing it out. Like if you have two choices and you prefer to play on the Xbox One X, I mean, the resolution's probably better there, especially with the upscaling. I don't know if you can turn off the HDR. Some people say they feel like the HDR takes some of the colors away from it because everything's like kind of washed out. I don't know. I haven't played it, but I prefer to play on the PlayStation 4, even though I have an Xbox One X. I just mostly play games for the exclusives. Although I'm debating on getting Cyberpunk 2077 for that, because I'm just like, I don't even know how that game's gonna run even on the base consoles, let alone the enhanced one. So I might get that for the Xbox One X just because of the little bit of extra horsepower. Like that game looks like it might need all the help it needs. I'm curious what the console versions are gonna look like, because all the gameplay I've seen is based on PC, and I just don't see some of that game running unless they like split the game up and there's just a ton of load times. But I heard that's not even going to be a thing. But it's CD Projekt Red. Like, I don't even know how the hell they got The Witcher 3 to run on consoles, and then it just blew my mind. Even though they're kind of assisting with it, they're releasing The Witcher 3 on the Nintendo Switch. I mean, granted, it doesn't look all that great, but the fact that they could even get it to look to as good as it does now, like, is blowing my mind. The Switch is a really impressive system. This runs at 60 frames per second. That concerns me about the Switch version. The Switch version is going to be running at 30 frames per second, which might work, but with this kind of game, I don't know how 30 frames per second is gonna affect the gameplay, because this game's all about speed and reaction. But again, like, you can grind, you can level up, you just go back and forth. If that frustrates you, maybe this isn't the game for you. Like, if you don't like going back and fighting the same enemies over and over again, it's satisfying to me personally. And if you're used to playing like RPGs or JRPGs of any type, like, that's pretty common ground. If you see those portraits in the background, that's really cool. Like, some of the people that kickstarted the game, if they reached a certain tier, their portrait would be featured in the game. So those are actually backers, which is kind of cool. One of those actually somebody's cat, which is hilarious. And that's one of the reasons why it's just like, I don't want to show too much of the game, because it would just like spoil part of the fun of exploration. But yeah, like, if you can't beat something, just go back and grind and level up. But if you don't like that repetition, like, I don't know what to tell you, but Dark Souls seems to be all about that, and that's a super popular game, so I feel like a lot of people won't have problems. Now, I find frustration with Dark Souls because you have to remember everything. You die over and over again. You're trying to like gain things to help get more powerful. I don't remember if you level up, like, but those games they're not bad games, they're just not games that are for me. They kind of frustrate me because it takes a lot for me to really get into a game. So when I want to get into a game, I don't want to die over and over again. I actually want to like keep the momentum going. So games like Dark Souls and stuff like that, where I'm dying instead of progressing in any way over and over again until I learn something and just I get a little bit further, and then there's something bigger. Like Sekiro's another one. Like, the games are masterfully like built as far as level design, aesthetics go, and they're really creative, and I really want to get into it. But at least for right now, with everything on my mind, like, I just can't get into it. But I think they're great games. But this just has the right amount of grinding where it doesn't feel like a chore. I don't mind it, and the enemies are really creative and fun. That's the cat I was talking about. Somebody must have sent a picture of their cat. I don't know, like, how much liberty the artists had, like, with the actual portraits the people sent. I don't know if they can make suggestions. Like, I wonder if that cat actually only had like one eye or something. That'd be interesting. Maybe that wasn't a Kickstarter. Maybe they blend it with stuff they made up too. But they kind of look a little bit out of place. So I imagine that they're donators. But like, if they didn't donate, this game wouldn't happen. So I don't mind it at all. And the art style's fantastic in my opinion. And everything's just so well done. And I'm so happy I'm finally able to play this game. I never thought the day would come. It just felt like it was just postponed and postponed, which I don't mind if I knew it was eventually going to come. But after Mighty Number 9 came out and everybody hated it, I was like, oh man, I hope the developers don't get cold feet or whatever. Personally, I didn't think Mighty Number 9 was the shit show that it was as far as the game itself. Like, I mean, Mega Man 11 obviously has more polish, but I thought Mighty Number 9 was okay. But if I would have donated money and the way the bonuses were treated and the extra stuff, and then they were trying to start another Kickstarter for Red Ash before they even started like another game, and then the game early Dreamcast title, like, I could imagine being frustrated. But for somebody who just went to Best Buy and picked up the game, like, and it was $30, and it came with like I believe it came with like a decent colored manual. But like, I didn't support the game, so like, why am I getting all this cool stuff while these other people are like left in the dark, and some people didn't even get the codes to their game till late. So I could understand that would exasperate their frustration a bit. And like with this game and even Shenmue 3, like, I can imagine like the developers really being worried, because this is like a new avenue for these high tier games, and these are like developers that are like on their own for the first time after they left a huge company due to their frustration, and they're making promises that they're making spiritual successors of the franchises they were no longer to be able to work on. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure to keep on delaying the game, because that makes you wonder like what's wrong with it and stuff like that if you're not like internally developing the game with the developer. So I imagine there was like a lot of hesitation. Like, I was worried the game wouldn't come out because I had a feeling like some of this was going in the back of people's minds. Like, I figured maybe the popularity of the game would lose momentum because I really wanted it to do well, because I really want this genre to last. But in the meantime, there were really cool games that kind of shared like Castlevania's aesthetics, like Shovel Knight, which is awesome. And this kind of has like the same kind of DLC that Shovel Knight has, where they'll keep on adding like the DLC for free. I believe now you can actually buy a disc that has like all the Shovel Knight DLC actually on the disc, so you don't have to worry about like your digital content being deleted. Now, don't quote me, I didn't buy it, but I don't know why they would release another disc if you already downloaded. If you're already gonna have to like download everything off of the internet to be able to get all the DLC, that wouldn't make any sense to create another physical copy, because there's no point, because even the oldest copy of like Shovel Knight is supported with all the DLC. I don't know about like the super old ones like the 3DS version, I don't know. But Shovel Knight was really cool. Dead Cells, even though that was kind of like a 2D version of Dark Souls, it definitely had aspects of Castlevania in it. That was really cool. Owlboy kind of has some similar aspects, but I mean, you also have to give Metroid credit. The Metroid 2 remake on the 3DS definitely has the same kind of aspects of this. I believe you don't level up and stuff like that. It's a remake of an old Game Boy game, and that didn't get a lot of love, but like for a game where you have to remember things, like I imagine it was pretty difficult, like to try to remember in black and white. At least with the original NES game, like the colors changed a little bit based on where you were, so it's probably better that they redid it. I haven't personally played that game. I've wanted to. I don't know why. I've been really hesitant to buy new 3DS games. Switch games I've been hesitant to buy because like usually I find like a cheaper PlayStation 4 game that I want. There's so many games on PlayStation 4 that I typically want, and then there's a handful on Switch and they're like $60, and I don't know. I always somehow favor the PlayStation. So you saw like an Iron Maiden over there, so I'll have to figure out something to be able to close that later. But on the map you'll see that like there isn't like a white line filled out all the way, so you know that's somewhere that you'll have to go later. And if you actually push the touchpad, you actually can look at the larger map and kind of figure out where you need to go. Also, just like the other Castlevanias, there's like teleportation rooms, so you don't have to backtrack all the way. Although for leveling up purposes, it's kind of easier to, in my opinion, to level up by just walking back and instead of teleporting back, unless you know you're like at the right level. But just walking back and forth versus teleporting, I think, is an easier way to level up, in my opinion. And these are like the loading rooms from the old Symphony of the Night games, where they had like a little picture of a CD like on the ceiling. It was kind of funny. But I couldn't be happier with this release, and this is a budget title. It was $20 less than other brand new game releases, so it was $40. I don't know what it costs overseas or in Canada, but I imagine it'd be less than a regular price game. And it's nice that there's actually a physical copy. There is a day one patch if that's something that bothers you, but I don't know. I didn't play it without the day one patch, so I don't know what it's like without it, but you're also steadily going to be getting new stuff anyway in the game, so there's going to be more patches and DLC and stuff like that. So if that's something that turns you off, that might be something you want to keep in mind, but it's only to like help you. But I don't know what state the game was like before the patch, and honestly I'm not reviewing it, so there you go. But anyway, thank you so much for still watching my channel and listening to me ramble about games. I would definitely check this out if you either like Metroid 2D games, or especially if you like any of the Castlevania games after Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This is a no-brainer. I hope this series becomes a franchise and just continues. Like, I'd love to see what they do in the future. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing well, and take care. Bye.
If you want to, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.